As a design educator, he teaches typography, interaction design, and design research. He has co-created and engineered several typefaces. Please welcome our next speaker, Girish Dalvi.
This is an unusual space for me. As most of you would know me, this is not a place that we hang out in. The place that I'm most comfortable in is the street. And the street is full of letters. We see letters everywhere, but letters have an unusual quality. In the sense, we are sort of blind to letters. We know that there are letters, but we don't register the shapes of them. They are like trees. We know there are trees, but we don't remember. We are sort of blind to the shape of trees, right? And part of the training of a type designer is becoming sensitive to those shapes. So what we do when we teach typography and type design is we take students on walks, especially through old bazaars, and we ask them to look at lettering, right? And letters not only integrate culture, but they also reflect culture. They reflect certain values. And if you look at these letters, for example, there's a great deal of values of, let's say, harmony, grace, and most importantly, equality, right? So you'd see the way the Kannada and the Latin is, they're sort of treated equally. You look at the style of the Bangla and the Latin, there's a certain equality in style, right? This quality is under threat these days, or in many places you see a sort of inequality that has come into letters, right? And you would see inequality not just in sizes and styles, but there's also inequality in purpose. The large letters are meant to communicate, the small letters are meant to be a legal requirement, right? And so this is a sort of an overt inequality in letters. There's also covert inequality. So most of us are familiar with such signs. Here, even though the designer wanted to treat each of the letters equally, you will see that the Latin that is the English looks larger than the other scripts. So Indian languages tend to look smaller when set with English, right? Most of the work that we do deals with such kinds of inequalities, right? And one of the other inequalities that sort of trickles in is inequality of process and inequality of people, right? So most branding agencies usually will create a brand in Latin. That is, the English is thought out first, right? And then as an afterthought, they say, oh, we need a Bangla, we need a Kannada, we need a Telugu font for it. And so they will approach people like us, and then they say, hey, we have a brand, can you sort of then come up with a matching script for it? And so then we work on it, and then we essentially translate the brand to other scripts, right? And this is fairly complex in the sense, at times, so here's a design that we did. The original was what is called as a high contrast Bodonian font, and then they wanted, let's say, a Telugu. Now, since we are all in Bangalore and the script is Kannada, so if you've seen Kannadiga or Telugu letters, they are heavy at the bottom, right? Whereas in the English, the O is thin at the bottom, right? So if you would have translated it as it is, then to most native readers, this wouldn't have looked good. So what we did is we sort of flipped the axis and then sort of made the bottom heavy. In spite of doing this, what you would know is that the conceptual rigor of the Latin is untranslatable to Indian scripts. That's primarily because the concept works only for English. It doesn't work for any of the Indian scripts, right? And this is the great inequality of process. Most designers or brand agencies or many of the so-called elite designers, many of my students can think only in English. They work only in English, and they are unable to conceptualize in Indian languages, right? And so most brands are conceptualized in English, and then other scripts are considered secondary to English, right? And this is tragic in some senses, right? So the question is, how do we respond to this, right? And we respond to this by drawing letters, right? We are a collective. We essentially work with Indian language scripts. And the work that we do essentially involves drawing letters day in, day out. And the whole purpose of drawing letters is for the joy of letters, right? There are no clients, there's no requirements, there is no brief, right? We draw letters to sort of push the boundaries of our imagination and push the boundaries of the script that we are sort of working with, right? And so these are just some letter form explorations that come through our exercises. There is no purpose to them. These letters then become words, words then become sentences, and then people think, well, these are fonts. And they say, hey, these look like fonts, can you make a font out of it? To which we say, and we have to sort of inform people that these are not fonts. This is a lettering exercise. And many a times what you need is only a lettering exercise. You don't need a full font because a font takes a lot of time to work with. So here's the latest lettering that we did for Amir Khan Productions. There's a movie that's coming out. And so they asked us, can you do an English, can you do an Urdu and a thing? And then we did that, right? But at times the styles are so good that we actually make fonts out of them, right? So here's a sort of a work in progress font that's coming up. This is called Abha, right? And you might have seen a font called Gotu. This font also came out of the lettering exercises that we did, right? If you've seen these fonts, these are not large fonts. This is typically 1 or 2 scripts and a single weight because they are display fonts. This is not what we are sort of usually known for. What we are known for are large multi-script type families, right? And what I'm going to be talking today is about a large multi-script type family that we've made. The type family is called Anek. Anek, as you know, means many. So the many is not just many weights, many widths. It's also many voices, many ideas, and many perspectives, right? And of course, because you are working on many scripts and many ideas, you need many designers, right? So we have a sort of a flat hierarchy. There's no one, what you'd call art director. There are 12 designers. 10 designers work on 1 script each. At times, some designers work on 2 scripts. And me and Nupur, we sort of help everyone out, right? Essentially, all decision-making is democratic. We vote on what the decision is, and that's how we sort of work, right? So the brief for this type family was fairly broad. We wanted a width axis, a weight axis. It had to be a monolinear display and a variable font, right? And some of you might be wondering what is a variable font. You might have not heard of what a variable font is. But typically, variable fonts is a relatively new technology. In an earlier time, every font file was different. So if you had a regular, you would have 1 font file for it. If you had a bold, you had 1 font file for it, right? And if you have 9 fonts, then each weight and each style had a different font. These days, you have just 1 font file, and that 1 font file contains all the styles, and the styles are all continuous. They are not discrete. What it means is the weight is now a slider. So Anek moves from, let's say, 100 to 800. So you have 700 weights, right? And the widths also are a number, right? So you don't have discrete weights, but you sort of move the slider, and then you get all the weights and widths that you want, right? So this is in your favorite graphic design software. This works for the web as well. Or in fact, it's far more useful for the web. So all the web designers that are here, because your weight and width is now a number, your layout or the width of the column can change. You can sort of input a number and just select the width, and the column will change. So you'll see that the layout changes when you sort of change the width, right? So that's a variable font family that we wanted to make, right? The other part is 10 scripts, right? As you know, we're not too fond of the Latin first approach, right? So the question, which script to design first, does not apply to us, right? So then how is it that you're going to start designing for 10 scripts? Well, we start designing all scripts together. Like all scripts are designed simultaneously at the same time by all designers, right? This is not as easy as I say it, because each script is different, right? Every script has a distinct culture, it has a distinct history, it has a distinct rhythm, a distinct texture. So to sort of harmonize or sort of bring any kind of inequality in this is fairly challenging, right? Each script has different, what do you call, orthographies, the way it works, right? In some scripts, the Vattus sit below. In some scripts, they sit on the side. The heights of the scripts are very different, right? And most importantly, what changes is the visual complexity. Every script has some very simple letters, and suddenly there are extremely complicated letters, right? So when we are dealing with such a large design space, so most designers are comfortable with this normal. They work largely with regular to sort of bold. This is the space that most people work with. The edges, which is the thin condensed or the extra bold expanded, that relatively is a very hard space to sort of design for. And why is it so hard to design for? Well, you have all kinds of illusions, right? So when you draw fonts, or when you draw letters which are very thin, or when you draw letters which are very wide, some letters tend to look extremely, they look stretched. It looks as if they have not been designed, but manually stretched, okay? One has to design fonts which are red, right? So there are ambiguous shapes that come up. So imagine these two shapes at smaller point sizes. So this gap will get closed up, and then both of them are going to start looking the same, right? So we sort of change the design, open up the counters, or make structural changes within letters to make sure that they look good at even small sizes when they're condensed, right? Rhythm is an important part. Usually, readers want even rhythm, right? And letters are not designed for rhythm. So some letters are wide, some letters are narrow. And so when you sort of make them condensed or expanded, the rhythm gets sort of affected, right? And one has to do this across all of this, right? One has to do it for the simple characters, one has to do it for the complex characters, and one has to do it for the condensed and as well as the expanded, right? So we start by sort of what is called a structural variations in the letter. So most of our designers begin by exploring structures. So on the top, you see more softer structures. On the bottom, you see more sharper structure, or rather a mixed way of doing. So we explore parts such as terminals, or with the way this is. So this is smoother as against more straight, and so on and so forth, right? We then move on to exploring what are called as morphological features within certain scripts. So the folks who can read Telugu will know that this is called as the talakattu, right? And so this hat kind of a feature, right? And in different letters, it fits differently. So in the D, there's a complete talakattu. In the P, it's sort of disconnected. And in the Ch, it's half connected. And then on the right, you see the different styles of talakattus that we've tried, right? So this is the more traditional rounded one. This is sharper. This is more pointy. This has a step, and so on and so forth. So we then try sort of specific visual features for every script, right? This becomes like a pool of features because I'm working with 10 scripts. So in Gujarati, you will have the Vanak. In Devanagari, you will have the knots or the ghats, right? You have scaling, joineries, you have matra connections. We create this pool of features, and then we sort of say, let's bring this all together and then make a font, right? And to make a font, we then move on to what is called as working with primitives, right? So to begin this font, we decided a certain circle, right, which will be the basic robust structure for our font, right? Now this is a primitive. It again has to be interpreted for every script. So every script is going to interpret the circle differently. And if you will be able to, if you'll observe, all the circles are drawn differently, even though they are circular forms. I'll expand and show. So Latin, as I had shown, the circles are thicker on the side, right? Kannada and Telugu, the circles are thicker on the bottom, and Odia has a bit of both. The circles are thicker on the side and thicker on the top, right? So that's how we are sort of building the font from the primitives, right? An important point when we sort of make a font is what's the feeling or the expression that the font is giving, right? So then the circles have to be interpreted to specific letters. Like in Gujarati, the circles come on the left. In Malayalam, they'll come on the right. In Kannada, they come down below. And in Bangla, they're completely different, right? There's no sort of circular form. So then you sort of interpret the circle into letters, right? coming back to the earlier point, you want to give a feeling or a common feeling to the entire font, right? And in our case, the designers, they wanted the font to be sharp. They wanted the font to give a feeling of sharpness, right? And this was commonly decided. And then every designer worked on how can they make their script look sharper, right? So for example, Kailash, who designed the Devanagari, he tried like sharp terminals, he tried flared terminals, and then finally chose a set of features which he thinks are sharp, right? And then you can sort of see how this expands. So this sharpness changes. At wider ranges, it looks sharp, and the sort of features mellow down when the script sort of becomes narrow, right? I'll give you an example. So this is Tamil expanded, and you look at the way the form is. So forms become condensed when they condense. The matra joiner is changed. The way the matras are drawn change. This sort of loop flattens out, this flourish disappears, and the relative proportions of letters changes from expanded to condensed. The same will work for Bangla and on every script, right? So circular forms become flatter, the terminals turn in inwards, the sort of angle increases. So for every master, there's a structural change in the letter, right? So if you're with me, here we were. So we decided the weight and width. We sort of created some set of shared visual features. We did some scaling, and then we got this feeling of sharpness, right? Do you think the font is sort of done? It's not. We need feedback. So even though we know the scripts very well, we take feedback from people, right? And we take feedback from people on the street, and we ask them, hey, we've designed these letters, what do you think, right? And I'll show you an example. So when we showed Malayalam to people, this was the original M. And you'll see this is a very sharp M, right? This is a very sharp B. But people didn't like it. They just felt that it was out of their script grammar, so we chose more traditional forms. So we are open to feedback, and we change letters. But we also reject feedback, especially from designers. So many designers... Many designers suggested that all the matras should be harmonious. What they said is, though the Devanagari matra, the Gujarati matra, and the Gurmukhi matras, why don't you make it the same, right? And we felt, no, every script is distinct. They should have distinct matras so that they stand out alone. And so we distinctly gave different matras to each of this, right? So as a result of this, the sort of fonts work well on their own. That is, you can sort of use them for just the scripts that they're designed for. And they also work well when they're sort of used in sort of multi-script settings, right? But what is this? These are just one or two words. Fonts are not used for just one or two words. Fonts are used for text as well, right? And text is a whole new ball game. Because when you're sort of designing for text, you're not only designing the outer shapes, you're also designing the inner spaces. And that's where kerning and spacing comes in. And Indian languages have exquisite spaces between letters, right? And we sort of then try and harmonize spaces between letters across scripts, right? So here you have two sister scripts, Tamil and Malayalam, and you'll see how we've sort of tried to harmonize it across these two scripts, right? So here they sort of blend in very well. Oftentimes, we have to work with scripts that are not connected, right? So here, for example, is Gujarati and Latin, and then we've tried to harmonize them over here. And here is Devanagari and Odia, and then we've tried to harmonize it over here. Now remember, all of this is variable, which means you get this across all weights and across all widths. So the spaces change across weights and widths. So just as letter forms change, the spaces also change between letters, right? So just to give you a recap of how we draw letters, okay, and the amount of work that goes in. And this is for one script. We do this for 10 scripts. We start with 4 masters, right? Then we expand that to 9 masters, right? So these are sort of interpolated and then adjusted. This then becomes 40 instances. These are not drawn, but they sort of work with, right? So what a designer does is, these are what we call as root letters. So we start with a basic set of root letters which have all the visual features, right? The root letters are then expanded to what is called as the Unicode set. That is all the matras and all the the letters. We then build the complete set. So these are conjuncts, right? All the conjuncts, all the vattakshars, all the numbers, all of that sort of comes in, right? Then we've done it for 9 masters. And when we do it for the full font, this is the number of glyphs that we work with. Right? And so finally, this is how the font is, right? The best thing about it is we believe in open source. So the font is free and open source. So you can download the font or use it off Google source. And this is not the only font. We have over 32 fonts that we've designed, which are free and open source. You can download and use them. By and large, we've worked with 17 Indian writing systems. So the bulk is in the center, but we've also worked with scripts for indigenous communities such as Masaram Gondi and Gunjala Gondi. These are scripts used by the Gonds. There are 2 historical scripts also that we worked with. We've also worked with a Nepali script, right? And so coming back to equality, right? So what's the impact that we've had, or where do we see our fonts? Well, if you're ever in a metro now, it's likely that you will see our fonts. So this is Mukta, it's done by me, and you'll see how, right? There's some sort of equality within the fonts, right? If you are ever at a museum, if you go to, let's say, the Bihar Museum, or if you're in Bombay, you'll see the way the Latin and the Devanagari works. This again is Mukta, right? If you ever pick up a newspaper, it's likely the font that's set in it is designed by us. So be it an app, be it a print, or be it web, our fonts are used all across, right? If you watch TV, it's likely that the font that you see there is designed by us. And it's not like we are recommending it. It's because it's open source, people have picked it up themselves, and then they're using it, right? Facebook, social media influencers, fonts are fairly popular. During the COVID times, for those of you who are in Bombay, all the social media campaigns and all the print was done in Mukta, which was done by us, right? My favorite, actually I'm a big fan of South Indian films, is our contribution to the South Indian film industry. So a lot of posters, right, across will use our fonts, right? In fact, one of our fonts, Malar, is named after the Malare song, because we loved the song. Right? This was used in the farmer protest. This is very high-end designers using our fonts. The backbone of a democracy are our political parties. And almost every political party uses our font. So be it Arvind Kejriwal, Mamata Banerjee, the Shiv Sena uses it, the MNS uses it, and of course, the ruling party also uses it. Right? If you ever download the PM's app, right, or you look at anything from the PM's office, the Satyamev Jayate that's written over here, that's set in Mukta. Right? And of course, young people set it, the same font is used to make memes, right? All our students make memes out of fonts, right? Most big brands use it for branding. And many people say, hey, Girish, you must be quite happy, right? The font is being used. What I'm most proud of is none of all of this. What I'm most proud of is your early morning, good morning, WhatsApp messages. So, right. And what I'm happy about is that the fonts or the tools that are available to the most powerful people in the country are also available to people on the street. And that, I think, is democratizing design. Thank you. Thank you. No, you guys are very kind. I really appreciate this. Thank you so much.
Some questions. So this is the first standing ovation of the day, Girish, and highly deserved. My first question to you is, are you crazy? Really, are you crazy? You put in all this work. You have a non-hierarchical democratic team.
Right.
How long did the whole work for Anik take?
It takes around a year and a half.
A year. At the end of it, you give it all away free because it's open source.
Yes, yes.
Again, are you crazy?
No, we are not.
Okay. Second question then. How does this business model work?
We'll chat.
No, we want to know. The nation wants to know. Is there a business model behind this?
Yes.
And is there a way that you are adequately compensated for the
yes,
extraordinary amount of work?
Yes.
Could you tell us a bit about that for budding typographers in the
Right.
audience?
So large capitalistic corporations such as Google fund us to open source funds.
Okay, let me check for the audience questions now. Sudhir Bhatia asks, can you explain the tech behind the variable font? How do you make infinite weights and widths without screwing up the font, I guess?
Right. So that's right up my alley. Right. So the tech is, so it's a new tech of sorts. It's, so you essentially draw the masters and essentially the algorithm sort of interpolates, right? But I mean, even though there are masters, you have to check there are glitches, right? So when you will interpolate, if the nodes are not matched or if things are not designed as per specification, the algorithms will screw up, right? So which is why there's extensive testing. So one of the things that are of the many things which we've not spoken of is testing, right? To get it integrated into Google Fonts or to get it integrated into any browser and to make sure that the font works on every operating system or every software requires tremendous amount of testing. And it doesn't work. So what will happen is Apple will change its algorithm or Windows will suddenly decide to move somewhere else and then suddenly the font will break. So, but right now, because the web uses fairly standardized algorithms, it sort of works.
But I can't get over this. All those newspapers, TV channels, movie posters, nobody pays you to use the font?
No.
It's all free?
Yes.
Crazy. All right. Okay, Sudhir Bhatta, I hope that answers your question. Next question from Bharat Murlidhar. What happens if a new script is added to a font family? Can it be added?
Yes, it can be. In fact, so the original font, Mukta, it started with Devanagari and Latin. Then we added Gujarati, then we added Tamil, and then we added Gurmukhi. And now we're going to be adding different scripts. So fonts, because they take so long, certain font families start with single scripts. And then, so this is one of the few ones where we designed everything together. Usually we design one or two and then expand it.
Okay. Next question from Gaurav Bhalotia. What defines a common feeling identity across scripts for a font?
Right, so that's a tricky question. It's essentially, this is interpretation of the designer, right? So designers are free to interpret feelings and expressions, right? And you have to give agency to that designer and to those people, right? So it's a very subjective sense, right? So when we say that this is feeling sharp, it's because we all collectively felt it was sharp. And when we showed it to people, we said, hey, of these 3-4 things, which ones do you think is sharp? Which one, what? That's how we sort of worked it. But I wouldn't be surprised if 3 people stand up and say, this doesn't look sharp. I'll agree with
Okay,
you.
and suppose you're driving down a highway or an airport, you see one of your fonts that's stretched or expanded. Do you feel like killing yourself?
No. In fact, no. So one of the things, so part of being a type designer is agreeing to accept people. I do not judge people. My fonts have been used.
Even those who stretch?
Even those
who use Comic Sans? We have to judge them. At least them.
No. Those who do Comic Sans, they will put emoji, they will सब करते हैं. उनका डिजाइन है, उनका एक्सप्रेशन है. डेमोक्रेसी में सबका सब है. ठीक है. Elite. So we are not elitist. We are pluralist. मतलब सबका साथ सबका.
Even if they take सबका साथ सबके width सबके weight. Okay, all right.
Right.
Even if they mess with your fonts, you don't feel bad. Okay, very bodhisattvic kind of
No,
designer.
but this is opposite. I must say that this is a contradiction because when I see it on the street, I'm very happy with it. But when my students do it in the classroom, I die 1,000 deaths.
Okay, at least good. Thank God. Some little bit is there. All right. Priyanka Rai from MathWorks asks, do you keep web accessibility in mind while working on fonts?
Yes.
Or
so there's a fairly
separate philosophy for print and separate for web?
Right. So that's a good question. So earlier, the tech was such that you had to sort of design separately. So for web, there's a special process called as hinting. So a special set of instructions are added to fonts so that they look clearer on the screen. But after Mac Retina, those things sort of went out. So you can have separate technological enhancements to make the fonts look good on the screen, or you can solve the problem visually as well, saying that because screens are of a certain kind, then let's design it differently.
Okay, more questions coming in. Right. Any thoughts on how to bring teams of product designers or app designers into thinking of the native language or the native copy first and English next?
So it has to begin with the school, right? So most of us, unfortunately, in our training itself are not taught Indian language typography. So one of the things that, because if you don't bring expression or exploration in the classroom, it's very hard to do it within a company, right? Because the company works on deadlines. So the free space is only, I think, available in classrooms. So I think changing curriculum is one step towards it.
Do you consider English an Indian language?
Yes, I do. Yeah, we do.
Because even in small town
Absolutely,
India,
yeah.
English signboards are everywhere.
So we consider English to be an Indian script.
And there are about 7 different dialects or 10 different dialects
Correct,
of English in the country.
Yeah.
Right, one more question from Kumar Abhishek of Chingari. For a digital product app that's going international, what should be the ideal way to cater to an international users from a font typography perspective? Can these fonts be designed in a foreign language, for instance, in an international
Right, so they are designed. So they are designed for Vietnamese and so on and so forth. Okay. And so we have people in, like, let's say the Netherlands send pictures of our fonts being used there.
Okay.
But because we don't interact with, so see, feedback is an important part of the process. And because if you don't get feedback from users, we are not very confident as to how good it is.
And how do people react? How do you get feedback? People say, I like this, don't like this. People have feelings about fonts?
Yes, they do.
They do?
Yeah.
And you're able to interpret those
Yeah,
feelings?
yeah.
Okay, all right. Okay, any other questions? Please send them in. Otherwise, Girish Dalvi.
Thank you, sir.